Good morning, I'm Diane Macedo. Thanks for streaming with us. In today's update, more than 13,000 children are now in U.S. custody after crossing the southern border without a parent or guardian. Many are currently crammed into overcrowded holding areas, and now the White House says thousands will be housed at the Dallas Convention Center as it continues to search for a long-term solution. The Secretary of Homeland Security addressed the issue earlier on GMA, but stopped short of calling it a crisis.
What we are doing is addressing young children who come to the border to make claims under the humanitarian laws that our country has established years and years ago. And we are building the capacity to address the needs of those children when they arrive, but we are also, and critically, sending an important message that now is not the time to come to the border.
Mayorkas says the administration needs time to rebuild an orderly, safe way to immigrate to the U.S. Prince Philip is heading home after a month in the hospital. The 99-year-old is recovering from a heart procedure. He was first taken to the hospital exactly a month ago in what the palace called a precautionary measure. He was later transferred to a hospital specializing in cardiovascular health. But today, the prince was sitting upright in the car on the way back to reunite with the Queen at Windsor Castle and is said to be in good spirits. On the vaccine front, Mississippi is opening up vaccines today to anyone over the age of 16. Alaska has already done the same, and 2 other states have announced similar plans. Over 27% of the U.S. adult population has gotten at least 1 dose of the vaccine so far. Moderna also announced it will start testing its COVID vaccine on children as young as 6 months up to 12 years old, making them the first U.S. vaccine maker to test infants down to 6 months. And various levels of lockdown have taken a toll on many people's health. A new study from the American Psychological Association out this week found 82% of adults never imagined the pandemic would last this long. So how does our mental health look a year into the pandemic when it comes to general stress, addiction, and the added stress that comes with parenting and kids at this time? Let's bring in American Psychological Association President Dr. Arthur Evans, Harvard Professor of Psychiatry and Addiction Medicine Dr. John Kelly, and psychiatrist and parenting expert Dr. Janet Taylor. Thank you to the 3 of you for being here this morning. Dr. Evans, I'd like to start with this study on stress in America from the APA. Who is struggling the most and why?
Well, what the survey found is that many Americans are struggling, but the groups that are having the most difficulty, as we might imagine, essential workers, parents of small children, particularly children who are being schooled at home through remote learning, people of color, and Gen Z. That is that young group of young adults up to about the age of 23.
And Dr. Kelly, the pandemic has been incredibly difficult for people struggling with addiction as well. We've seen a roughly 40% increase in opioid deaths, overdose deaths from 2020 compared to 2019. So what sort of an impact has the past year had on those struggling with addiction and those in recovery?
Well, it's had a mixed impact. One of the, obviously the stress and social distancing and social isolation incurred under COVID has been a major stressor for people in recovery, but people also, importantly, starting recovery who just struggle to get a foothold, as you can imagine, via social distancing, just getting clinic appointments in person, getting on to meeting other people in recovery has been very challenging for people getting a foothold in recovery. People who are already in recovery, I think a lot of them have transitioned to online resources pretty successfully. But it's certainly been a challenge in terms of the stress and social distancing overall.
And Dr. Taylor, according to that APA study, 75% of parents say they could have used more emotional support this year. What do you make of that number and the impact that this year has had on parents in general?
Well, it's accurate because, as a parent, you're in charge of your child, but you're also worried about whether you're going to pay the rent, the mortgage, your job, you're isolated from your parents and those familiar sources of support. So that certainly translates into women. Moms report some of the highest levels of stress during the pandemic, post-pandemic, and then that unfortunately will translate to children because stressed parents and especially stressed moms unfortunately can make kids feel stressed, out of sorts, uncertain, and children are worried about the health of their parents and grandparents and caregivers, and also away from their usual sources of support, which could be, their classmates and their teachers. So it's really been a challenging time for parents and families' mental health.
And Dr. Taylor, it's not just the parents, the kids have had a hard time too. What concerns do you have about children's mental health right now?
Well, the main concern I have is even pre-pandemic, and I'm not a child psychiatrist, but adult psychiatrist, but see kids in the clinic I work in. And pre-pandemic, there were kids who were anxious, lots of isolation. I think a real emphasis on, certainly technology and playing these games where they're not connecting with other children as much. And during the pandemic, certainly that has been heightened. So my concern is, how children will deal with their anxiety in a healthy way, certainly a lack of sleep, and just the uncertainty and angst that brings to kids who worry anyway, and just what we need to do to ground them and certainly teach our kids how to be more resilient and cope with what is a temporary event, but hope in a way that it will not impact them long-standing in terms of just excessive worries or fears.
And Dr. Evans, in this stress study, you also found that Americans are nervous about returning to fully in-person work and social events. Do you expect that will ease once vaccinations are more widespread and the CDC says those activities are safe, or is this something we're all going to have to get used to even after that point?
Well, I think this is something that we're going to have to get used to even after the vaccines are widely distributed. Right now, there's really no difference in the way people who've received the vaccine versus people who haven't received the vaccine feel about the future, the anxiety about the future. And one of the things we know about people who have prolonged stress, and that's essentially all of us because we've been at this for over a year now, is that it has long-term consequences. That's the real story here, is that when so many people in our population have experienced long-term chronic stress for this amount of time, it's really important to understand that we're going to see the effects of this, not only in the months in the immediate aftermath of the pandemic, but long-term, perhaps going out several years, which is what we've seen in other kinds of crises like this.
So, Dr. Kelly, what can we all do to cope with this, especially those struggling with addiction right now?
Well, I think there's a number of things that we can do, which people have done, which people are doing. You can kind of summarize this, what I call a SANE approach. SANE stands for social, A for activity, N for nutrition, E for emotion regulation. And, it's very important for people who are initiating a recovery attempt and also who are in recovery from a substance use disorder to maintain connection. So that social connection is so key in recovery, just for the accountability, for the support that people need, the recovery-specific support. So that's the social aspects are very important. Activity, just making sure that we get up and get out the door, hopefully, where we can actually get some sunlight, get some exercise, get the blood circulating is going to be very important for general resilience, but particularly for relapse prevention. Nutrition is another one, making sure that we don't succumb to the temptation of comfort food. Some of that's okay, but too much of that can deprive us of kind of natural, important vitamins and minerals, which can subtly affect our cognition and mood. And then the E of the SANE approach is emotion regulation, really trying to look for a silver lining wherever possible. Can we focus on the positive? Can we be grateful for something every day? Can we look to our peers and other people in our social network who can help us see some of the positives? And so those are some of the things that people have done to build resiliency and prevent relapse.
All right, Doctors Arthur Evans, John Kelly, and Janet Taylor, thank you for your time this morning. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And houses of worship across the country have been offering up their sanctuaries as vaccination sites, as nearly 2.4 million doses are being administered to Americans daily. ABC's Terry Moran took a look at how faith leaders across the country have been talking to their congregations about the COVID-19 vaccine.
You must love one another as I have loved you.
On Sunday mornings, you'll find Father Paul Abernathy preaching the gospel at St. Moses the Black Orthodox Church. But the rest of the week, he's walking the streets of Pittsburgh, sporting a fedora and preaching a different gospel, the gospel of vaccine acceptance.
I've just heard so much about the COVID vaccine, and I'm not too sure about it.
Let me ask you this. Would you be open to receiving some information about the vaccine?
The ancient conflict, science versus religion. And here it is again in our time. A 2021 Pew Center report found that vaccine hesitancy in America is highest among black Protestants and white evangelicals.
Many Catholics might be wondering whether or not they should take this coronavirus vaccine.
I would tell them absolutely.
There is a conflict from time to time with science and scriptural teaching, but I don't think there's a conflict as it relates to vaccines.
What are you telling the people who come to Life Tabernacle?
Don't take the vaccine.
Now, ABC News Live takes you on the ground, in the church pews and out in the streets, where the messages of vaccine confidence and resistance are being preached.
Sometimes when we pray, he gives us blessing by way of medicine, by way of vaccines. When I receive the vaccine, it means I have one more day to praise God on this earth.
Here in Pittsburgh's predominantly black Hill District, Father Paul hears questions about the vaccine that are rooted in a painful history.
Tell me, Father, about the reasons that black Americans might be hesitant to take this vaccine.
The first is distrust of government. When people see the government involved in vaccine creation and dissemination, right away there is a degree of distrust because the experience that people have had with many other government programs has been negative. The second is a distrust of clinical abuse. Many people think of the Tuskegee experiments that affected 600 African-American males, but many people, aside from Tuskegee, have lived experience of discrimination in the healthcare system. And so this history of clinical discrimination, this history of clinical abuse that is lived experience now also undermines vaccine confidence. And thirdly, a distrust of corporate America. There is this sense that there are people who are going to be getting rich off of the vaccine. We want to affirm the negative experiences people may have had with the government system. What at the same time we want to do is to share information about the vaccine that is accurate.
Efforts like Father Paul's to bring accurate vaccine information to the African-American community may be working. That Pew Center poll shows that hesitancy among black Protestants has dropped from a high of 59% last fall to 30% today. But doubts about the vaccine still linger among half of white evangelicals.
You're telling your church members to choose not to have a vaccine?
That's right. I'm telling them.
Don't get it.
I do it every service.
You might have heard about Pastor Tony Spell of the Apostolic Pentecostal Life Tabernacle Church in Baton Rouge, Louisiana.
God, you've been good to me, Jesus.
He's been arrested more than 30 times since the pandemic began for defying emergency public health orders in Louisiana that prohibited large gatherings.
For 61 years, our local congregation has never missed a service. Their families are in this church. Their finances are in this church. Their faith is in the church. The church is everything to us. It is a conviction for us.
Among their congregation of several thousand, Pastor Spell says they only had one death that was determined to be related to COVID-19. When one of the church's lawyers, a close friend of Spell's, was hospitalized and severely ill with COVID, it made no difference.
Did that make you think twice? This is real. This can be devastating. Did that make you think twice?
Never thought twice. When you have a religious conviction, nothing's going to separate you.
The charges against Tony Spell are currently pending. He is separately challenging the constitutionality of the governor's orders. That matter is currently on appeal in the federal courts. His attorney tells ABC News they are confident they will win.
Where in the Bible does it say don't get a vaccine?
1 Corinthians 6:19, 1 Corinthians 3:16. What? Know you're not that your body is the temple of the Holy Ghost? The Lord dwelleth not in temples made with hands. It's not a building, but the Spirit of the Lord dwelleth in us. Don't defile that temple. Any man that defileth that temple, him will I destroy. If the vaccine defiles my body, if the medical advisors that we have say, better beware, we're not going to do your vaccines, we're not going to wear your mask. If they were wrong a year ago on our assembly, they're wrong today.
The FDA has authorized 3 COVID vaccines so far, and those vaccines were tested with over 100,000 volunteers before the agency gave them the green light. In approving them, the FDA noted that the vaccines are highly effective at preventing severe illness and death, and that side effects are rare. But Pastor Spell's message is still being heard in his church, and some members may be following his lead.
I do not plan to get the vaccines. We believe here that God is the ultimate healer. I mean, with God, he can cure anything, everything.
Beyond the belief in divine intervention, there are moral concerns about the vaccines as well.
I believe it's genocide. I believe it's infanticide. When you take a fetus from a mother's womb, the safest place in the world, and you take that baby and you use those stem cells to inject into somebody's bicep to keep them from dying from a virus, I don't trust you. Okay.
But there's no stem cells from fetal tissue in those vaccines. They were not made with those at all.
Some companies don't use stem cells. All right, it's a synthetic vaccine. Irregardless, we're not taking the vaccine.
The quick rollout of the vaccines has reignited the debate over the relationship between modern medicine and stem cells from abortions.
For the COVID-19 vaccines, those fetal cell lines came from elective abortions in the 1970s and 1980s, and they are then replicated over time. Fetal cell lines are not the same as fetal tissue. From one aborted fetus, you could have millions of fetal cell lines that allow for vaccines to be able to be replicated and made.
These differences in vaccine development have led some religious leaders to prefer one vaccine over another.
I would be concerned about something that we used fetal cells from a murdered child. But Moderna and Pfizer, we've been told from the scientists that the way they produce that vaccine, these things were not used.
The religious community is concerned that the Johnson & Johnson vaccine is morally compromised because it's used fetal cell lines in development, as well as testing and production. The reason why they're partial to the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines is because Moderna and Pfizer only use fetal cell lines in testing.
In the Catholic Church, the debate has caused a rift among church leaders. Many U.S. dioceses across the country have now declared the Johnson & Johnson vaccine morally compromised. But those statements put them at odds with the Vatican itself.
The Holy See, Rome, has issued a statement and declared that the vaccines are morally and ethically acceptable. They involve the hard work of a lot of very competent people.
So would you say, for people who are wondering, that the vaccines are part of God's plan?
Well, insofar as human knowledge is part of God's plan, yes. Whenever we can give good example to our people as public figures, as leaders in the community, we should do so. And then by the example of Pope Francis, Pope Benedict, I've had the vaccine. We're trying to tell our people, we want you to follow our good example.
And it's not just the Pope. Franklin Graham, son of famed evangelist Billy Graham, told us he's taken the vaccine as well.
First left Charlotte, he left on that train.
We met him on the grounds of the Billy Graham Library in Charlotte, North Carolina, his father's boyhood home.
And God needs you in his kingdom.
My father believed in modern medicine. If any time there was a vaccine or something that could help protect you, he was an advocate for it. He took it. I believe that it's consistent with Scripture that we protect our lives and do whatever we can to save life. So I don't have any problem with telling a person to take an aspirin or telling a person to have a vaccine.
For Graham and for many people of faith, the vaccines are a proof of God's love.
I thank God for the doctors and the researchers that have put this time and effort and money to develop these vaccines. And I hope that the American people will use them.
With so many struck down by the coronavirus, Graham takes issue with those who use their pulpits to preach against the vaccine.
Well, I would hope that the pastors in the pulpit would tell people how they can be saved from God's judgment, and that's through faith in Jesus Christ. I think a pastor to tell someone not to take the vaccine is problematic. Because what would happen if that person died, got coronavirus and died? Then is the pastor responsible? I mean, I would feel responsible.
It doesn't have to be either we love God or receive the vaccine, but really there can be the two coming together in the church.
Do you make headway with people who rely on the Bible, on Scripture for their life and don't want to get the vaccine because they look at it, they say it tells me not to?
It's a different faith than what I am familiar with. I pray that we can all come together and that our views certainly can be reconciled. And I pray that whenever we preach our faith, we preach it in a way that truly does value human life. And that is why, for me, this work is of utmost importance.
And for Father Paul Abernathy, that work begins in the community, one person at a time.
Our thanks to Terry Moran for that report. When we come back, Bachelor Matt James is opening up about the show's controversial season and revealing why he broke up with Rachel Kirkconnell. We'll hear from him after the break. Welcome back. Last night's finale of The Bachelor is facing some backlash after Matt James gave his final rose to Rachel Kirkconnell, ending an extremely controversial season with off-screen revelations of racial insensitivity. Now James is opening up about the season and what happened after the cameras stopped rolling. Here's TJ Holmes.
It's heartbreaking and it's devastating.
This is the ending that just months ago, no one could have predicted.
I can't propose to you today. But that doesn't mean I want to lose you.
On last night's Bachelor finale, Matt James, the series' first ever black bachelor, didn't propose to frontrunner Rachel Kirkconnell, but offered her his final rose.
How were things immediately after leaving Pennsylvania?
It felt like an extended honeymoon period, and it was great.
But while the show was airing in recent weeks, photos of her attending a plantation-themed party and liking photos containing the Confederate flag went viral. James, who was still in a relationship with her at the time, learned about them at the same time as the rest of the world.
Take me to the specific moment when you first were made aware of these images.
You hear things that are heartbreaking, and you just pray they're not true. And then when you find out that they are, it just makes you question everything.
And overnight, Matt James tells Emmanuel Acho, author of Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man, who stepped in on the show for Chris Harrison when he defended Kirkconnell, that the couple has since split.
What was that breakup conversation like?
As tough as you can imagine. And it's heartbreaking. If you don't understand that something like that is problematic in 2018, there's a lot of me that you won't understand it.
Kirkconnell, who has previously apologized, telling Acho she wants to do better.
You know, I never took the time to make that connection, because if I would have taken the time, I easily could have understood what was wrong with it.
How often did you lay awake at night worried that eventually these photos might come out and could ruin your life?
I didn't think anything of it. I didn't think of the trauma that it would cause.
Matt and Rachel meeting in person on The Special for the first time since the breakup.
When I questioned our relationship, it was on the context of you not fully understanding my blackness and what it means to be a black man in America and what it would mean for our kids.
Is the door even slightly open for relationship reconciliation here?
The work and the reconciliation that needs to be done is work that I can't do for you. And I know that you're capable of doing it. And that's something that she's got to do on her own.
Rachel, you may never speak to this man again. What would you finally like to communicate with him?
Since day one, all I want is for you to be happy. And I just want what's best for you. And I am sorry.
Our thanks to TJ Holmes for that report. Now, earlier today, Matt James actually spoke to Michael Strahan about the important conversations that were sparked from the controversy surrounding this season. Let's listen.
And last night was a tough night. It was the first time you've seen Rachel since the breakup with those photos came out, and you seem very, very emotional about it at times, taking a long time to answer a question. So what was going through your mind?
Good morning, Michael. It hit me like a ton of bricks, you know. I felt the weight of everything that I was carrying throughout the season and with what we were dealing with as a country, and having to explain that, why it was problematic to me and our relationship, which was extremely difficult.
And you didn't get engaged on the show, but you said we want to explore this relationship. So in the time that you spent with Rachel away from the show, without the camera there, I know you didn't get engaged on the show, but were you leaning that way? Was it getting towards an engagement? Did you feel you were heading that direction?
You know, I think when you're dating somebody, that's what you're hoping for. So anytime I'm in a relationship with somebody, it's because marriage is the ultimate goal. And when you find out things like I did, it deters you from that ultimate goal because, like I stated after the final rose, there's just things that you might not understand what it means to be with someone like me.
And do you feel like you missed out on exploring relationships with other women because you didn't know about Rachel's past?
I would say that the conversations that have come from everything that's taken place are more important than anything I could have left with. And if that means that I leave under the circumstances that I left with, then so be it, you know.
I mean, you talked about the moment you realized you had to break up with Rachel. You were thinking of what it would mean for your future together. Before these photos came to light, had you ever had conversation on what it would be like or mean to be in a biracial relationship and about raising kids together?
Yeah, I think that a lot of the time spent during filming and having those conversations was amongst the other women of color, the conversations I had with Chelsea, the conversations I had with Michelle, and I think that we could have had those conversations amongst the white women who were there as well. But hindsight's 20/20, and I probably should have asked more clarifying questions.
Yeah, hindsight is 20/20. But you know, Rachel said she didn't know how hurtful these photos were. So when you heard that from her, and that she was not worried that they would ever come to light because she didn't think twice about them, how did you feel about that? Did that surprise you at all?
You know, that's the frustrating part about the position that I'm in, is having to explain not only to Rachel but to the rest of America why things like that are problematic, because we don't have that chance to have that ignorance, you know. Think about Breonna Taylor, think about Tamir Rice. They didn't have that opportunity to have the ignorance, you know.
Yeah, that is true. And she talked about her journey to understanding. Where do you think she is on that journey?
I know that Rachel's a good person, and everything that she outlined in her apology and her statement, I'm looking forward to seeing her do, because I know she's capable of it.
And we know that it was announced that Chris Harrison, he will not be back for the next season of The Bachelorette. He's taken time to reflect on his comments that he made earlier. So what do you think about Tayshia and Caitlin being picked to host?
I'm excited. It's a fresh start, and we need more women hosting, and it was the right move.
And knowing what you know now, if you could, would you go back and change anything about your season as The Bachelor?
I think that as the love stories become more diverse, the people that tell them should become just as diverse. And there's way more qualified women and men of color who can step in and fill those roles, and I'm excited to see the institutional change take place, and I'm honored to be a part of it.
And one more quick question. You said that feelings don't go away overnight. I think there's something we can all relate to. So is the door open? Are you leaving the door open for a future possibly with Rachel?
I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done before I can think about being in a relationship with anybody. I need time to process everything that's going on, and I want to respect Rachel and what she's got to do as well.
Our thanks to Michael and Matt James for that interview. And let's get more on this now from ABC News contributor and SiriusXM radio host Mike Muse. Mike, what did you think of Matt and Rachel's interaction last night and the news that they broke up over this controversy?
I found their interaction as complicated as this story is very complicated. I never thought, Diane, that you and I will be having a racial social construct through the lens of The Bachelor. But here we are, in particular coming off of the heels of the Meghan Markle interview with Oprah Winfrey and Prince Harry. Interracial dating now is at the forefront of America. It's at the forefront of our conversations because of the racial challenges, dynamics now that we are having in society. You know, Diane, before this season of The Bachelor, and really before maybe 2018, America has enjoyed, a lot of Americans have enjoyed the privilege of not having to look at race, not having to think about race. But there are those of us who always have to wake up with the burden of race and having to wake up with the burden of explaining microaggressions and passive aggressiveness and racial undertones and racial policies that prevent a lot of people from moving forward. And as Matt said something to Michael that I found really interesting, in the GMA this morning, he said, I should have asked more questions. And I think now, as individuals engage in interracial dynamics and interracial relationships, they're going to have to ask those questions, even if they come from existence where their blackness isn't an issue for them or their whiteness doesn't force them to think about race. They're going to have to now, because even if you live in this world and maybe you're privileged enough out there where you don't have to ever see race as an interracial couple, and I'm happy for you if that's the case, but that's not reality. And there will come a time at dinner. There will become a time when that black man you're with may get pulled over or have an awkward interaction or uncomfortable or aggressive interaction with the police. And then how is that conversation going to be? And then how will that person respond? And then that's why we need to ask those questions, because it comes down to how is your partner going to respond? And that's what you need to know now as you're dating and doing the courting process. And that's a hell of a lesson that we learned, Diane, through The Bachelor. Who knew?
All through The Bachelor, right? And Mike, Matt also mentioned on GMA that the conversations sparked by this season are more important than anything else that happened. How do you think this all affected the broader conversation around race? I mean, to your point, here we are having this conversation, and it's all due to The Bachelor.
It is, but I think it widens it out, Diane. And Matt said something interesting on GMA. That was a really good interview that Michael Strahan did. He said that, he's had those conversations with the women of color on Bachelor, but he didn't have it with the larger women or the white women as a whole. I think because The Bachelor is such a mainstream property, right? Everyone around America watches The Bachelor, from middle of America to the coast. And so as a result now, it's forcing us to have these uncomfortable conversations. And Diane, it's about time. For so long, race and race conversations have been the burden on marginalized communities and people of color. It's about time now that more people become included into the conversation, whether they like it or not. Black people, we have to have it on a daily basis. We don't wake up wanting to talk about race every day, but we do. And I think now that burden needs to be shared on the rest of America in order for us to move forward. We see, in particular with the biracial community and those who have interracial identity, the complexities and challenges that they face, right? We see it coming with Meghan Markle now. We see it with Matt. He's biracial himself. But what's interesting, Diane, it's about sometimes how individuals present, right? So Matt presents with blackness because of his color and complexities, but his mother is white. And so he's having a really different experience as someone who presents black, but has biracial identity with his mother being white. And so what is that world like for him? And how does he navigate this space in his world? And how many others are navigating that space? How is Meghan Markle navigating that space? And so I think now, because of the popularity of The Bachelor, it is America's franchise that now we're starting to see, and I hope, Diane, more Americans engaging in this very complicated and uncomfortable conversations that marginalized communities have had the burden to bear for so long. I think now it's time for the rest of America to jump on the conversation.
And Mike, longtime host Chris Harrison is also stepping away from the show, at least for next season. He's being replaced by former contestants Tasia Adams and Caitlin Bristow. What do you think this means for the franchise, and how do you hope to see the franchise move forward from this?
I'm excited for the franchise because the previous host showed that he's not the one to navigate when it comes to interracial dynamics. You know, this Bachelor, this cast was the most diverse cast that we've seen. I only see it getting more diverse as we go. And so it's going to take host or hosts plural in order to be able to navigate these difficult conversations on race that we are now going to have. You can't skate away from this elephant or, you know, run away from the elephant that's in the room, Diane, anymore when you see an interracial dating experience on The Bachelor or The Bachelorette. They're going to have to come up with a conversation about how do you feel about George Floyd? How do you feel about Breonna Taylor? Like, those conversations are going to have to exist. How do you feel about the AAPI community hate that is happening? How will you respond to that? How will your family respond to that? Because Matt said something interesting, Diane. He said, you never saw the whole me. You never saw the wholeness of me as a black man. And as too often, sometimes black men and people of color, we get separated from this othering that exists, right? Not understanding that we are every black man in America. I'm no different than any other black man in America. Do not other me. Do not make me different than the rest. And so when you see me is when you see a black man on television, when you see a black man in the street, this is how you see me as well. I'm no different. And I think that was something really interesting that Matt got to. And I hope America picks up on that a little bit more, because we do have those conversations in silos. But I'm hoping now we can have it moving forward, and having two new hosts who can navigate that complexities of that, particularly being women, I think it's important in the backdrop of the Me Too movement too as well. So I think The Bachelor just catching up to where we are in social discourse in America.
All right, Mike Muse, always great to talk to you, Mike. Thank you.
Thanks, Diane.
And that does it for this ABC News Live update. I'm Diane Macedo. Thanks for joining us. And remember, ABC News Live is here for you all day with the latest news, context, and analysis. I'll see you back here at 3 p.m. Eastern with Terry Moran for The Breakdown. Stay safe.
Hi everyone, George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.